that memory. It was 3:20 that the flight finally took off from Stansted, and as soon as I got here in Glasgow, which is the second time ever that I've crossed the border from England into Glasgow, I saw that there was a long line of people waiting for the taxi, and that's also made me a little bit more panicky, but just made it just in time. I'm not quite sure what the word very religious means, but a Jewish person who is practicing and observant. Firstly, it's good to be here. It's good to be with friends. It's good to, and I'm delighted to speak about Israel amongst some friends over here. But let me first start off by paying tribute to Vicky and to Sammy for the amount of work that they do and everyone involved in the Glasgow Friends of Israel team. Because as somebody who's been involved in conference and events beforehand, I know a great deal of work does take place behind the scenes. Having worked alongside a couple of members of Parliament and also members of Knesset, there is so much that does take place. So I just want to pay honest, sincere appreciation to those in the team, and may this be a forerunner for many more conferences to come. I'm going to start off with something from our newspaper. It's actually no longer, I'm not included in that because I stepped down from head of news at the Jewish Weekly, which is one of the many Jewish newspapers in this country, nationally. But I stepped down from head of news and no longer with them. Actually, just before I came up here, they spoke to me again about doing a column. But this is something that I pulled out from earlier this year. And there was a section in there called Ask the Rabbi. I'll just hold it up to you like this. Ask the Rabbi. And I brought him in. He's a very well-known rabbi from London's Mill Hill Synagogue in northwest London. And his job is to answer questions related to Jewish law, but also he gets some questions asking, why is it that Israel is such an occupying, brutal, killing force? And he's very forthwith with his answers. He's a colleague, he's a friend, and I'm glad he's working for the newspaper. So this was one of the letters that was written in. I'll just read it out to you. Might be easier without my glasses. As Israel celebrates 70 years, I'm wondering why, in all this time, Israel cannot make peace with its neighbours. Isn't it time that the Israeli government grants the Palestinians what's rightfully theirs, or at least enable them to coexist in the land? At this rate, can Israel really survive another 70 years? Now that's the sort of questions that we hear on a regular basis. So here comes the answer, and I won't go through the whole thing, but I'm just going to start off with the intro. He starts off with a joke. It's a very well-known joke. It's been around for many, many years, so if you've heard it before, please humour me and laugh. And if you haven't heard it before, well, you'll decide whether you wish to make a joke of it or not. And it starts off like this. I don't think this happened, but the Israeli ambassador at the United Nations recently spoke, prefacing his remarks with the following. And he said this: "Ladies and gentlemen, before I commence with my speech, I want to relay an old Passover story to you. Moses led the Jews out of Egypt, through the desert, through the Sinai desert, until they reached what was known as the Promised Land. The people became very thirsty, and they needed some water. That part is true. 3 days and they went without water. So Moses struck a rock with his staff, with his stick, and a pond appeared with crystal clear water. It wasn't described as a pond, but nevertheless, there was water that came out, ready enough to quench the thirst of literally millions of people. The people rejoiced, and they drank to their heart's content. Moses wished to cleanse himself, so he went over to the other side of the pond. He took off all his clothes, he dived into the cool waters, and when he came out of the water, he discovered that all his clothes had gone. Now this part is not true. It was made up. Says the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, I suggest that this was the Palestinians who stole Moses' clothes. At which point, the Palestinian delegate stood up at the United Nations and said, this is a travesty. Everyone knows that the Palestinians were not around when Moses led the Jewish people out of Egypt. The Israeli ambassador answered, thank you, and now I will begin my speech. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Netanyahu visited Lithuania. He was not there for 1 day, or 2 days, or 3 days, but 4 whole days. Now, Lithuania is a small Baltic state. It has less than 3 million people residing there, and it's of very small geographic, political significance. But nevertheless, there was a reason why Mr. Netanyahu wanted to spend that amount of time. He was speaking at a remembrance service where 70,000 Jews were murdered by the Nazis and their Lithuanian collaborators between the years of 1941 to 1944. And as he walked towards the podium, there were some tears coming down his eyes. And he said, when he got to the podium, I have returned. After 100 years, I have come back. This is a trip that I've been wanting to make for some time. There's a journalist around, and I wasn't one of them at the time, but I used to work with a magazine from Israel called Mishpacha, and the editor there was part of the team. And he informed me exactly what took place. You see, what had happened was that Mr. Netanyahu's grandfather grew up in Lithuania. He went to yeshiva. He went to what's known as a Jewish academy learning Jewish law, Torah. And as he came out one afternoon, walking through the park with some colleagues, he was beaten up really badly. So badly that just before he lost consciousness. He said that if I'm to survive, I will leave Lithuania and I will make a new start with my family in what was known as British Mandate Palestine. That was 1920. He did survive, and of course, as you probably know, he did make it over there. He sadly died in 1945, 3 years before the birth of the modern state of Israel. Understanding this perhaps gives us a little bit of glimpse into why Mr. Netanyahu is so tough when it comes to defensive and security matters in Israel. It also helps us understand why he says what needs to be said, especially at the United Nations, and will call out countries, rogue countries, when they need to be called out. As a result of speaking last week at the United Nations General Assembly, he spoke once again about Iran and revealed a second site, and in fact there was a third site, which was undeclared by the Iranians. The IAEA has said since, for the they've replied back rather to the Israelis to say, don't tell us how to do our job. We've inspected the sites that we wish to inspect, and we're not planning to inspect this one. But you get an idea of why Netanyahu is saying what it is that he's saying. Now, security was pretty tight, as you would expect. But there was a small group of demonstrators in one of the squares when he was driving by. And some of the placards up there were saying, Netanyahu a killer, free Gaza, stop the occupation, and I don't need to go down the list, I'm sure that you're probably familiar with it. There was 2 local Jewish residents, and they explained that they were very concerned about a very small demonstration. Nothing wrong with demonstrations. That's what we have in democracy. But nevertheless, they were concerned. Why? Because they saw it growing, not just in Lithuania, but across Europe. You see, they say these words: young, well-educated people have been infected with this new brand of Western left-wing anti-Semitism, and many are using these words: the occupation, apartheid, violation of human rights. And it's beginning to spread like wildfire. You know, when it comes to Gaza, you've seen the signs, "Stop the Gaza Genocide." Well, let's look to see how the genocide is getting on. See, there were figures in 1970 that showed that there was around 340,000 people living in Gaza. By the way, Jewish people have never lived in Gaza, at least not in the last few hundred years. It's been Palestinian Arabs. In 1980, the figure was 460,000. In 1990, the figure rose to 650,000. Actually, 1980 was 460,000. In 1990, it was 650,000. In the year 2000, it went up to approximately 1.3 million. And today, they're estimating it at around between 1.5 to 2 million Palestinian Arabs living in Gaza. If this is supposed to be a genocide, the Israelis are not doing a very good job. You know, back in the 1980s, Israelis, and I've got friends, I was based in Jerusalem for 12 years or 13 years, I have an Israeli passport, I worked out there, learnt out there, spent a lot of time in the Knesset over there, and got a great suntan over there as well. But in the my mind just went, I was thinking about the suntan actually. I was thinking I'm in Glasgow and so I felt the cold, and as soon as I felt the sun, my mind just went. So let me take the opportunity right now of telling you a little bit about who I am and my involvement in the media. See, I never really had any interest in the news. None at all. I actually became a disc jockey on the radio in the 1980s. Yeah, that was me, James Marlow on the radio. I was with a number of stations in London and in the southeast, and actually I moved out to Los Angeles to host the UK Top 30 Countdown across America. But whilst I was in Los Angeles, I took a great interest in news, simply because London's Capital Radio were asking me to cover earthquakes, entertainment news, the Grammys, the Oscars, and of course in May 1992, and I remember it very well, the LA riots, where 87 or 88 people were killed. And I was in the midst of it. And I came back to London, and they gave me a job on an ethnic radio station in London called Spectrum Radio. And there was a daily show on there called The Jewish Show. And I was hosting this daily show, which was a talk news phone-in, centered around the Jewish community in Israel. And I took a great interest in Israel and the Middle East, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, all the surrounding countries. We had many guests that came in. And that's where I started to develop my interest in Israel. By the way, in school, my best subject was history. The teachers told me, don't do history, there's no future in it. But I didn't listen to them, and I'm actually, for people who don't particularly like Jewish people or Israelis or those people who support Israel, I'm their worst enemy. Because not only am I Jewish and observant and practicing and lived in Israel and stick up for Israel, but I've learned Jewish law. I currently learn Jewish law. And I know Jewish history. So they don't like me. Because they don't really know how to respond. But I'm willing to engage a lot of people. You see, I was always told in the audience, there are 3 different types of people in the audience. I suspect this audience is slightly different. There's the people in the audience, and this also comes from a television background. If you're on the television, these are the people in the audience. If you're on the radio, these are the people in the audience. If you're speaking at a general event, there's a vast difference of people in the audience. There's the people that support the Palestinians and will always support the Palestinian cause no matter what. They loathe Israel. Israel is the occupier. Israel is the obstructor to world peace. I was told, although perhaps today things might be slightly different, but I was told, 2001, don't bother with those people. You're wasting your time, James. Then there's the second group of people. The second group of people are the people that support Israel and will always support Israel no matter what. Whatever they say, whatever they do, they've always got those people. James, don't waste your time with those people. You're wasting your breath. They support Israel. There's a third group of people out there. And that third group are the people who are very supportive of Palestinians. They don't understand why the Palestinians don't have their own states. They don't understand why it seems to be that Israel is always suppressing them and lining them up and checking them. They don't understand why Palestinians go to jail. Why sometimes they're in jail for a long time without trial, although that's very rare today. But nevertheless, if there's someone up there who's willing to engage with them, they're willing to listen to what you've got to say. They're willing to hear what the other side is saying. They're willing to pick up on some of your points and actually take some of the points in if they make sense. Those are the people, James, that you need to go after. Those are the people that you can change their minds on what some of the media coverage is saying, which is, in some cases, misinformation and false. And I'll give you a couple of personal examples. After I just take us. As I became more observant, I left the disc jockey business because you couldn't really play around in the entertainment business too much more. And I was a broadcaster. I had some experience in broadcasting. So I got a job at CNN on the business news. And then I moved into the ITM building in Gray's Inn Road in London. And in the Gray's Inn Road in London, they also had LBC Radio down below. And they gave me the afternoon show. In those days, it wasn't as popular as what it is today. It was rolling news, and I was enjoying that. And then I saw that there was a job going for Euronews in the ITM building. Now, at that time, Euronews, which is a network across Europe, hence the name, and they were looking for a couple of presenters to come out from London and fly out regularly to Lyon in France. I put my name forward, I sent them a tape. In those days it was tapes, it was videos and cassettes. This is 1999. And they gave me a call and they said, come on over. So I was happy to try it out. And I presented their news, the hourly broadcast, and then writing up a lot of scripts. And Euronews works like this. Pop that over there if I may. At that time it was done in 6 different languages. English, French, German, Italian, Portuguese and Spanish, I think were the other 2. I naturally was on the English side. So, the wire pictures, and for those who don't understand wire pictures, those are nowadays news networks don't have the facilities or the financial backing to send out crews all over the world. So therefore they pay money to a wire service like Reuters or like AP, Associated Press or Press Association, and you're paying for that, And they're taking pictures, say for example, something happening in Gaza. They then relay those pictures back to the studio, let's say back in London, but it could be anywhere in the world. You then take those pictures, edit it all up. By the way, sometimes if there's been a bombing or some type of explosion, I mean, it's all unedited pictures, so some of them are pretty graphic. So it's all edited up. And then you've got about 2 minutes worth of film that you need to voice. That was one of my jobs, did it regularly. And you got a bit of briefing as to what was happening beforehand. And when it came to the Middle East and Israel and the Palestinians, I had a little bit of knowledge of this. So there was one particular film that I had to voice. It was 2 minutes. And it was about Israeli troops going into Gaza. And there was shooting that took place. And the result was 24, 25 Palestinian Arabs shot dead by Israeli troops. I had 2 minutes to film. So I spoke a little bit about the Oslo Accords, which was signed in 1993, the suicide bombings. Actually, sorry, I didn't mention the suicide bombings. No, I spoke about how at that time it was Yasser Arafat, and some of the things that he'd said. It talked about the occupation and the Israeli, the American Apache helicopters who were gunning down their people, because that was the news. And as it's coming down to 1 minute 50, I then added a closing. And the Israeli government says that this was in response to last Tuesday's bus bombing that killed 7 people in Tel Aviv. That was the end of it. It went out on air. It was revamped or rerun, rather is the word. At 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5. The boss calls me in at 6 o'clock, just before 6 o'clock. James, I want you to see this report. Yeah? Now tell me, where are the pictures of an Israeli spokesperson in that clip? I said, there's not. Well, where is there a picture of even the Knesset or something to do with Israel? It's focused on Gaza. Why did you mention the Israeli government? I said, look, I had a 2-minute clip there. I spoke 1 minute 50 seconds related to the Palestinians. I said how many people, according to their numbers, were shot dead. This was 10 seconds. I've got to put in the other side, haven't I? That's not the story, James. That's not the story. The same thing happened the following week, the next couple of days, and gradually I realized that I was not one of them, and they were not one of me. Because to be part of a news crew, to be part of a news team, to be part of that desk, you've all got to be thinking along the same lines. And hence that's why we say sometimes there are left-wing networks and there are right-wing networks. Not too many right-wing networks in this country, but they say Fox in the United States is probably a good example. That's my own personal experience. After a few months, they got fed up with me, and I got fed up with them. So they stopped asking me over from London, and I was happy not to come over because the hours were very, very long. 12-hour shifts, long time. But I experienced this several times. When I moved out to Israel in 2001, initially to work at the Prime Minister's office, because they needed some spokespeople there, and the Prime Minister's office was opening up a new media outfit. I was very excited about that. I thought, I can help out with that, because I can see some things going on behind the scenes in the news. It never really got off the ground. There was a lot of arguing taking place between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister's office and some of their key people, and who would actually do the spokespeople and who would be in front of the cameras. And I'm allowed to say this because I don't represent anyone. But LBC called me and they said, start finding some reports for us. And I became their Jerusalem correspondent for 5 years. And at the time, the height of the suicide bombings was taking place. In Jerusalem, there was perhaps maybe 2 or 3 successful bombings every single week for a period of more than 6 months. It was a very tough time. Naturally, I escaped a couple, and lost some people as well. And LBC were doing regular broadcasts about this because it was big news, 2001, 2, 3, 4, up to 2005. I remember one morning on the breakfast show on LBC, and I think at that time they weren't owned by Global. Today they're owned by Global. So it's a much bigger network today, and also they've gone national on DAB. But at that time it was still local radio, although you could listen to it on the internet. And my last words on a broadcast on LBC radio in the morning was when we talked about 1967 and the occupation. My words were the following. In May 1967, Israel took land from Jordan and Egypt. And today, Jordan and Egypt make absolutely no claim whatsoever on that land. Very interesting, James. Thank you. Thanks very much. That's James Marlow in Jerusalem. When I said that, I stopped getting the calls. I moved over to talk sport, actually, because they also wanted some coverage. But you can see that sometimes when it's considered to be that you're a little bit more biased on one side than the other side, they don't like it. However, that's not true. Because you can say the things that we heard before Jerry Bowen says and gets away with it. Or the INTN person gets away with it. And there is, I can confirm, that there is a genuine cover-up to make Israel not look so good in the media. It's just the way it is. But you know, if you can face reality head on and accept it and work with it, you feel much better about it. If you're ready to engage with people and you know that you've got facts and truth and history on your side, it makes you feel much stronger and much more self-confident and much more able to express what you feel is happening. Now don't get me wrong, of course I'm not suggesting at all that Israel does nothing wrong. I myself, as a resident, someone who's voted in general elections in Israel, I myself criticize the Israeli government, not in the same way that the other people do. But I criticize them on the education policy. Yes, they've got one. Or the health policy. Or the bureaucracy. Or dealing with the tax office over there. Oh, I'll criticize them on some of the way that the Road Traffic Police Act, because more people die on road traffic accidents than they do, sadly, in wars. And I don't think they're enforcing the law enough. But nevertheless, when it comes to Israel, people don't know the basic facts. So let me just explain a couple of the basic facts as I run out of time very quickly over here. Wow, time goes by very quickly. You're enjoying yourself? Must have been that drink. Israel has a population of just under 9 million today. 9 million, of which just under 2 million are Palestinian Arabs. Just under 1.8 million, have Israeli citizenship. They have full rights, like every other Israeli citizen, and rightly so, to unemployment benefits, to child alliance benefits, to work, to health, to education. 1.8 million Palestinian Arabs. Some of them do the army, some of them work in government offices, some of them are security people, some of them are in paratroop units. Some of them are so pro-Israel, they put to shame some of the Israelis. In Gaza, right now, and perhaps I'm going to end with this simply because of the time. That's what happens if you put your notes down over here and you just look out the audience and you just talk. But in Gaza right now, let me give you some news, some updated news. In Gaza right now, there is a potential explosion about to happen. You see, the Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, is withholding a great deal of money that comes into the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, over to the Palestinians. And he has demanded that unless Hamas give up the institutions in Gaza and the PLO can retake them again, because they were taken over in a very extreme way in 2006 by Hamas, that he's withholding $100 million per month. The Egyptians have moved in. President Sisi has tried to negotiate with Mahmoud Abbas. And Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the Palestinian Authority leader, has replied back to say, look, I'm helping you. I'm doing you a favor. Why are you doing me a favor? Because if I don't do something about Gaza, it is going to become a threat to Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood are building up in Gaza. Now Israel is caught in the middle of this because Israel is getting the blame. Now Israel wants the funds to be transferred over because, if not, they've got itchy fingers. And there is talk of them starting another war, of which Israel will respond. And of course, we're back to the same in 2014, killing babies. Israel is doing what it can, literally, to get that money back. But it's a difficult situation. Let me just close, very briefly, with a story of a lady called Eleanor Chadwick, who several years ago, after coastal California, wants to be the first ever woman to swim out to the small island of Catalina Island and swim back. There's a great deal of publicity taking place. There were sharpshooters on the boats. Her coach and her mum was in one of the other boats. She swam out to Catalina Island. On the way back, there was this great big fog that set in. A smog, Californian smog. She said, I don't think I can continue. Her mum was in one of the boats and said, Eleanor, you can continue. You can do this. This is your dream. Keep going. Don't stop. She said, no, I can't. She swam a little bit further. No, please, get me out of here. The coach said, you can do this. You're just a short way away from the coast. Keep going. Please, don't stop. I'm rooting for you. She swam a bit further and she stopped. They pulled her out, put her in the boat, brought her back to the coast. Press asked, what happened? She says, if only I could have seen the coast, I would have kept going. She was just a half a mile away from that. The reason I tell you this story is don't allow fog. Don't allow that fog to mist up your vision and your goal and your objective of saying some positive things on behalf of Israel. The only democracy in the Middle East, the third largest political party in the Knesset, is the Arab List. Some of their members, very militant, very anti-Israel. A country where an Arab is a Supreme Court judge, where they are business people, CEOs, heads of departments. There is equal rights in Israel. But let Israel get on with doing what it's doing. High-tech, medical exploration, cyber warfare, experts in the world, and let it work with the Palestinians, not against the Palestinians. Thank you.